The following episode contains content that includes domestic violence and may be disturbing to some viewers and listeners. Please proceed at your own discretion.
But I regret giving her to him that night. Like, he put on a really good, like, sob story, like, my child, please don't, like, let me have one more night with her. And so I did. And so we woke up to him and her gone the next day.
Remarkable people overcoming remarkable challenges with resilience, dedication, community, and grit. Listen as they share their stories of overcoming adversity. Open your eyes to what is genuinely possible for all of us. Authentic Adversity with host Chris Howe.
Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Adversity podcast. Today, I sit down with a pro MMA fighter. She's a survivor of domestic violence and now an advocate for victims of domestic violence, an all-around fighter and a really inspirational story. This is Jamie Miller. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. I've been looking forward to this one. My wife is the one who connected us, and she had she had so many great things to say about you. Like when I said to her, do you have anybody that you follow that you would, think would be a good guest? And she's like, you have to get her. You have to get Jamie. She's so good.
Oh, that's so nice.
I mean, honestly, I think that she relates to a lot of your story. And the fact that you're a fighter and she's a fighter, and I think that's probably how she found you. And then she got more into your story, and there's a lot of relatable pieces, and so she really, really appreciates your story, as do I, and the fact that you're so open and honest, and you speak so freely about this stuff. I think it's very important. I think a lot of people are suffering in silence out there, and for somebody like yourself to be that voice, and maybe it reaches the right set of ears to change somebody's life and prompt them to say, somebody got out of this situation that I'm in right now. It's possible. And that's kind of the purpose of the show. I want it to reach the right set of ears. And I think your story is fantastic. So let's get into it. So I normally like to talk first about, where you're from, how you grew up, what it was like for you.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in West Virginia. Mm-hmm. Of all places. I don't know why most people are surprised when they hear
really?
that part of it. Yeah, but I guess I'm just, I've kind of lived all over, but yeah, growing up, I was in West Virginia. I was just always in sports. Okay. I was a highly competitive gymnast for a really long time. And then I wanted to be more social. So I transitioned to like sports in school, and so I could spend more time with my friends. And then,
what was home like for you, like growing up and that sort of thing too? And
I'm the youngest of four. So I grew up kind of like, my siblings say I was the favorite, but maybe that's why they were always kind of like picking on me all the time. But I was definitely like kind of a tomboy growing up. I was always playing outside, like in the dirt, riding our bikes everywhere. Like I was that kid, like oftentimes like without a shirt, and I would be mistaken for a boy sometimes. Right. But yeah, I had a great childhood, like a lot of friends. I did actually, it's just part of my story, right? So like growing up, I grew up in a domestic violence situation as well, with my parents. And it was between my mom and my dad. And they were married for 26 years, and he was, abusive toward my mom. So we grew up watching that a lot as well. So I think that's sort of like, obviously it's not my mom's fault, but I grew up really not having like a clear, I guess, example of what a healthy home life looked like. To me, it was just normal. Like for me, It was just normal to see those things and then to pretend like they weren't happening. And I think that's why I really just dove into sports and anything I could to take my mind away from what we were experiencing at home.
I see. So sports were like a bit of an escape for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So throughout like high school, you're still into sports. Were you like partying at all, or was it all sports? Were you healthy?
Not really. No, it was all sports. Like to be honest, I was a very scared kid. I was always afraid to like break the rules or do the wrong thing. I mean, there were times, of course, where I was like, a little rebellious and I get in trouble, like whatever, but nothing, I would never like go to parties or anything like that. Not until, so my 11th grade year, when my parents finally did divorce, my mom just needed a fresh start, a clean slate. So we ended up moving to Myrtle Beach.
Okay.
So I have two older sisters and an older brother. Obviously, my brother was already living in Myrtle Beach at the time and sort of convinced my mom to move because he's like, oh, this, it's amazing. And
right.
My brother has always been a chef. Like my family's like in the culinary arts.
Oh, cool.
My mom is now a chef as well. They ended up, I'll get to that, but
Sure.
they ended up going to culinary school together because they wanted to open up a business where they live now in Cincinnati. And so, yeah, but that's later. But anyway, so we moved down. And for me, that was just like a complete like uprooting of everything I knew, like at that age. Like obviously if I was younger, it'd be different. But yeah, that was just, I found myself in a dark place when we made that move because it was just such, for one, it was a culture shock.
Yeah.
And two, it was like, I don't know, I felt really alone at that time. And then from there, I was like, I started working in the service industry. So I was like, started off as a hostess at a restaurant. And then during that time is when all my friends became like older, like in college and stuff, because all my friends were like the people that worked where I worked. And so after work, at times we would, start going out like, oh, come out with us, come out for a drink. And I'm like, 17, like I should not be doing that. And I was like, kind of like, fuck it. Okay. It was sort of that became my escape. And then I started missing school. And then I just, I went down kind of a rough road there for a while. Just trying to find my place and like where I felt I belonged. And,
I can really relate to that. And so when you kind of started to use maybe like going out and drinking as a bit more of an escape, were you pulling away from sports at that time or were you still involved with?
Yeah, I was still involved a little bit. So I ended up, honestly, I was really angry at that time. I had a big chip on my shoulder and I didn't like the kids at that school, but I felt like maybe if I try out for something and make the team, I'll be like, it'll help me find myself again. And so, I ended up trying for cheer and made it. But like, even though the girls, it was just, I don't know, I just could not relate to them at all. Like I couldn't relate to anybody. So I was like angry and then I didn't enjoy it anymore. So I was kind of doing the bare minimum to get by, just like kind of showing up and not really wanting to be there.
Yeah.
So.
And I wanted to ask about, so the things that you saw growing up in an abusive household, were you able to express those emotions that you were going through with anybody? Were you able to share with your brothers and sisters? Were you like, did you have friends that you could go to and say, I think something's wrong, or was it kind of all kept inside?
Yeah, I kept it all inside. I just I don't think I knew how to process really any of it. And it was just coming out in like such like strange ways. And I just became angrier and angrier and kind of like going further down that road for probably like a year or two.
Well, I mean, I don't think that people that go through that kind of thing and see that kind of thing in childhood, nobody's expected to know how to process that at that age, right? We're not. I had a very similar thing, in my childhood, and like you can't expect a 7 or 8 year old kid to know how to process, their environment and what's going on, especially if it's toxic. And there's a lot of violence, whether emotionally, physically, verbally, that sort of thing. So I think that happens to a lot of us, right? When we find other outlets and we kind of go kind of full on with whatever that is, whether it's drinking, drugs, sports, any kind of escape that we can get, right?
Sure. Yeah. And it's, my mom certainly tried. She's, was a single mom of, 4 kids who were angry and just not knowing, like we were all kind of like lost for a while, I think. And, my mom, she tried putting us in counseling. She tried to like, but I think it was just maybe the therapist that we were assigned to or whatever. I don't think there was a disconnect. And so I don't feel like they ever got to the root of why I was behaving the way I was behaving, or why like certain things were happening in my life that, you know, it was just always kind of like, well, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. I'm just kind of like, I never really understood how to get to like the root of what I was feeling, or like, it was a lot of stuff to like, you know, sift through and figure out. But, and I didn't figure out till much later in life, but
for sure.
you know.
Yeah. Most of us don't, right? Until much later, until things go really, really wrong. Okay. So take me, so that's kind of like, teen years, you know, take me on from there.
So after high school, I was still living in Myrtle Beach, and definitely like on the party scene, because then I was like, even though I was already like going out and I knew everybody, but like once I turned 18, then it was like officially I can like legally be here. And so it was like, you know, whatever. I was like really going out at that time. And, you know, when I was younger, I definitely had, you know, dreams and goals to like go to school and, to go to college and, you know, pursue lots of different things really. But I just being on that, like in that dark space, I just was like, my mind was like, you know, I was literally going out every single night, almost every night in Myrtle Beach. And then especially when I didn't have the responsibility of like going to school or having to like, you know, show up for anything. And I always knew that that wasn't who I was. But at the time it was like satisfying or like filling whatever void I was trying to fill. And so I was like, okay, I'll just like keep doing this and keep having fun. Like I have nothing like, at that time I didn't really have any goals, but I just knew that wasn't who I am. And then my friend at the time, I think I was like 19 years old. A friend of mine was teaching a kickboxing class. And he's like invited me to the class. And I was just like, like I was like smoking cigarettes at the time, like drinking beer. Like I was like, whatever, no. And I was like, I do not want to, like, I didn't honestly had no interest at all in martial arts.
Really?
Yeah, which was interesting. I mean, I grew up at times like watching boxing with my dad, but for me, it was more of like, I appreciated it as a sport. But it was more of like a way for me to connect with my dad and like, kind of like have extra time with him when we would watch boxing. So, but other than that, I just had no idea it would be like anything that I could possibly love. And so, I went to the class and then I was just like, I love this. I'm going to do this. And I never stopped training after that day. And
you got hooked.
Kind of like gave up everything. Like it was like cold turkey, like quit smoking. Like I wasn't going out. You know, then you slowly sort of start, finding yourself surrounded by, you know, different people and people that are good for you. So, that became like my new addiction. So,
it's really interesting. And I think that happens to a lot of people that find martial arts. I mean, for me, it was later in life. I didn't find like Muay Thai until I was 32. You know, like I boxed a little bit as a kid, but, you know, I got sober at 32 and I was looking for something that would be, that would be as sort of thrilling as drugs and alcohol were to me, a little bit dangerous, that could drive me through this like recovery that I had ahead of me. And I needed an outlet for my, like, I think at that time I was so like emotionally broken and I didn't know how to express it. And to be able to punch and kick and elbow and knee things was like,
that's like
very therapeutic. And I think it is that way for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it really does save, like, it really, really, truly does. And I think like the biggest part for me too was just like the acceptance of like, you just kind of come as you are and people accept you like and all your weirdness and like whatever mistakes you like, nobody cares. Like we all have like our own shit but we're all there for the same reason. So like, I feel like everybody just, I mean, if you're in the right place, like not every gym is, you know, I've been fortunate enough to come, you know, every gym I've been a part of has been amazing. And so, but I understand not every gym is like that. So, but I just, that was like huge for me because I am kind of like a big weirdo, but I'm like super introverted. However, like I know how to like, you know, be extroverted when I need to be. But I was just always kind of like this shy kid. I feel like I'm still kind of that way. But it's just nice to be in an environment where people just like accept you. They're like, okay, like she's fucking weird, but we love her and it's fine.
But we're all weird, right? Like, cause I always joke about that with people. Cause people will say like, oh, like I said, come and try Muay Thai, come to the boxing club, come do whatever. And people are like, no, that's too intimidating. That's too intimidating. And I'm like, but you go in a weightlifting gym with all these meatheads who are staring each other down, comparing themselves to others, like headphones on, not talking, not social at all. And that's where you're comfortable. Like, come to the boxing club where people, you'll walk through the door. They don't care how long you've been doing it. It's your first day, or you're been doing it for 30 years. You're welcome. And we all want to help each other. Right. It's really a family atmosphere. And people who haven't walked through those doors don't really understand that. It's and that's why I try to get as many of my friends as possible to like just come and try it, because you'll be really surprised at how accepted you are. And like most of the people in martial arts, like, I don't know, I can say most of us are weirdos. So like, you're just around different brands of weirdos, right?
Sure.
So, yeah. No, that's great. So you were 19 when you got into it, and you just dove deep.
Yeah.
And did you start fighting right away, or were you just like training a lot, or?
I did. Yeah. I mean, I was training every day. I think I took like my first boxing tournament, like maybe six. Well, I don't even know if it was even 6 months. It was a very short time after I started training. Yeah. I was like, this is what I want to do. So I was just really, it was just complete like dedication and commitment from that point. And I did my first boxing match. Boxing tournament. And then I think I fought like 4 times that night. And
that's amazing.
And then won. And it's crazy because it was like one of those, it was like unsanctioned. It was kind of like this like underground thing.
Oh, cool.
But it was like it was still like an event, it was really cool. There was like a big boxing ring there, and it was like inside of like this very like schwanky nightclub, and it was cool. Yeah, I fought 4 times that night, and there was no weight classes. So you just, whoever wins that match, and then if you win, then you get paired up with that person for the next one, and then
really?
like so on and so forth. Yeah, and then I won. Wow. I was probably like 125 pounds. The last fight for me, I think the girl was like 150 or something crazy. Like she was pretty big. Yeah.
And you won. That's amazing.
I did. Yeah. And I was like, I want to keep this going. So then I competed in some kickboxing tournaments. And then that was when I was introduced to like MMA from just watching like Strike Force and seeing the first, I think, women's MMA fight I ever saw was Gina Carano and Chris Cyborg in Strike Force. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And,
really?
And without knowing, because it was like women in the sport at the time was just kind of like very, not rare, but kind of like you just didn't see it other than like, Strike Force. So it was like, it was really hard to get into like regional circuit and like the local shows. So funny story, when I'm like training and fighting. So by this time I was a completely different person because of martial arts. And I was actually, I was teaching classes. I was teaching classes at the gym, because at the time I wasn't working, because I was like, I can't work because I got to train. And so they're like, well, you can just work here and like pay your dues through working at the gym. And so that's what I did. And, cool. And then eventually like I ended up getting like a server job just to like kind of like supplement that. But I was just like really just full on like, this martial artist, and I like wanted to live like the martial way, and like, but then when my brother and my mom decided they wanted to open a business together, then they went to school together, like as I was saying before, they're like, well, we're going to move to Cincinnati and open this business, which they now own a bakery and pasta production business in Cincinnati. So they produce, my mom has a bakery, and then they produce also fresh pasta, sauce, and just so many amazing things. And so
all the things you can't eat when you're weight cutting.
I'm just like, glad I don't live there when I have like something I have to cut for. And so my mom's thinking like, oh, you're coming with us, right? Like to Cincinnati. I'm like, I'm not, no. And I was
staying
living
for
with
fighting.
my mom. Yeah, I was like, I'm staying here. And she just could not understand it. She didn't see it. She just saw this as a hobby. And for her, she wants, not that she doesn't support me, but she want like it with any parent, we want to see our kids, I guess go through the motions of like just having that security, right? Of like, go to school or like have a plan. I had no plan. I just knew what I wanted. I didn't have a complete vision for it, but it was just in me. And I was like,
sometimes that's the way you have a dream, not a plan.
Yeah. And so my mom's like, well, what are you going to, like, where are you going to live? Because I'm living with my mom at the time. I'm like, I'll figure it out. I don't know. So I ended up like living at the gym. We had like a small, sort of like what was supposed to be a cafe, but sort of ended up being kind of like a separate apartment where like other Friday, like it was kind of like our hangout spot, but it ended up being like where I was living. When my mom moved, I moved into that little spot. And so, and there was like a little kitchen there, and I, like had my little rice cooker. That's all I ever ate was like little rice, honey and rice. And so like, yeah, I lived like that for, I don't know, seemed like a really long time until I decided to finally move to Cincinnati. It was probably like a year, maybe a little more. And honestly, I loved that. It was just like I guess like the simplicity of it all, and just like being like a minimalist and just like a martial artist. And I'm like, this is how a martial artist, like I felt like I was just sort of paying my dues to like, I don't know how to even really describe it. But
well, it's like complete immersion. Right?
Yeah.
Like you're living, sleeping, breathing, eating, everything is fighting. And so, you wake up in the gym, you go to sleep in the gym. I can imagine that the experience that you gained in that time was like invaluable, right?
Yeah. 100%. People thought I was crazy because, I mean, with any dream like that we have, like people aren't going to see what we see. So it's like people just saw what from the outside looking in, they're like, what? How is she happy? What is she's basically homeless. She's living here, blah, blah, blah. Like everybody thought I was insane. I'm like, I was just, it was amazing. I really enjoyed that part of my life. And like,
for sure.
Such a growing and like building process for me. And just being alone with myself for like, other than like members coming in or other fighters and whatnot, I was like completely alone and just like in that like small little apartment space. And my coach at the time was actually a former Muay Thai world champ. Like he was like all over like Thailand. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before, Maurice Travis.
Yeah, I have actually.
I mean, he's old school. Yeah. That's who I started under. And so he's definitely a character, but like he had all of his like old like VHS tapes and all of these like really cool like very old like Muay Thai documentaries, and you could see how these people are living over there from like, from when they're babies to they're grown up, and they grow up like in that environment, and they just like live how like so I always sort of tried to like emulate that, and I'm like, that's the lifestyle I craved, and so I loved every second of it.
I bet. So from there you moved to Cincinnati to meet up with your
I ended up moving just because I don't remember the exact reason, but it was, oh, you know what, our gym closed, and then Mo had ended up moving to Malibu, so it was a struggle trying to like keep the space open and find another space. That's what it was. It was like a transition from like the gym closing, so I was just like, I'll just go be with my family. So
cool. So when you went to Cincinnati, I guess first order of business was find the right gym.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first first thing I looked for was so I found like this little like MMA spot in Cincinnati, and started training there, and then ended up I was working like a couple server jobs, and then I was teaching at the gym. I taught Muay Thai classes there to pay my dues there, and then I was like able to train like extra. So that was like where my MMA journey began.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. So and so this time, what age would you be roughly by then? You're in your early 20s type of thing?
Yeah, probably like 21, 22-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So where did things go from there for you?
So from there, that's where I met my ex, my daughter's father. So he had gone to college, I think somewhere in Ohio, but he had friends in Cincinnati. So he was visiting friends at the time, came to my gym, and that's how we met.
Okay. Yeah. So he was a fighter as well?
He was.
Yeah. Okay. So did you guys you instantly bond over fighting, or was it
we did. Yeah. We were like friends, like really fast. I mean, he's really charismatic, and just, I felt drawn to him. So, we just became like fast friends, and then fast, you know.
Yeah, sure.
And then yeah, that's sort of how our relationship began. And but yeah, and I mean, I was, happy at that time. I was still just like living life for myself and
Right.
doing my thing. And then that slowly started to shift.
In what way?
Well, I would say the red flags with him, looking back, I know them as red flags. At the time, I'm like, I knew something was off with him,
Hmm.
but I didn't really you don't really connect the dots in that way because it's just like, oh, this newfound love. And like, you want
Yeah.
to see the good in everything in this person that you care about and supposedly cares about you. And so
Hmm.
like, so some of the red flags were like, he was just like super jealous, like right away, and like really controlling and just wanted to know my every move.
Right.
And at first it's like, oh, that's cute. He's like, wants to like
Yeah.
know where I'm at. He misses me. Or like, you just sort of like chalk it up as like something
Hmm.
anything other than what it actually was. And so I just, didn't think much of it at the time. And then like other things would be like, he was a funny guy. Like, right. He always had like a sense of humor and like made people laugh. So,
Right.
but something he always did to me, like in the beginning, like he would tease me a lot. Like he would like, I used to have like really bad teeth. So he'd like make fun of my teeth. And like
Oh,
there comes a point where you're like, okay, that's not funny anymore. Like the
sure.
first, second time, you're like, you like kind of laugh it off, even though you're offended, but like you don't
Yeah.
really. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, like fuck you, whatever. So, but then as time goes on, he was just always picking at me for something like he knew I had an insecurity about. And then I
Okay.
would be like on the verge of tears or something, or I'd be like, then I would get angry, and he'd be like, oh, like don't have to get so mad at me, or like, you know what I mean? Or like, I'm just kidding, and like,
Like
whatever.
minimize it then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that was something that was really constant that like lasted through our whole relationship. We were together for.
And those little things wear on you over
Yeah.
time, right? Like that's like,
Mhm.
I can, yeah, I can imagine
Yeah.
that those
It's like
those
your biggest
things,
insecurity and somebody's constantly putting a spotlight on it and then like making fun of you for it. Like,
and it's not a joke. It's not a joke
no,
to you,
no.
right?
So yeah, just like things like that. And just like, yeah, like I said, like the controlling and the jealousy, all of that. So then, but I was just like, he latched on to me in a way I didn't realize he had such a hold on me until I was like, oh, like until like I think there's like moments where you feel stuck or
Okay.
you feel like I don't know how to describe it exactly. But I think there were just moments where it's like I think too for me, my mindset was like, oh, I really want to like maybe we can work through this or he'll change. Maybe he'll
Right.
change for me or I can be the one to make him change because he would open
Yeah.
up about his childhood. And so a lot of that for me in my brain was like when things would sort of like pop off or he would act strangely, I would sort of look to what he shared with me about his childhood. And I'd be like, oh, and then I would like feel sorry for him. So that's like in the beginning, that's kind of like what kept me like staying with him because I felt sorry for him and I wanted
Yeah.
to. It's like, oh, I know this guy's a good guy, and he maybe just needs a little help or support. And
Yeah,
then you find yourself sort of like even deeper because you're like investing in this person.
for sure. And I think having a story, having a past of your own and being able to maybe relate to some emotions and stuff like that. But, at the same time, you're now excusing things that are not meant to be excused, and you're making
Mm-hmm.
excuses for somebody based on their upbringing that was less than ideal, but now it's affecting your reality, like your
Yeah,
present,
exactly.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a hard thing because you want to have empathy and you want to have sympathy and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and you want, especially when you're in this new like exciting and like loving
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and
Yeah.
you want so badly for it to work. So some of the little
Yeah.
things you might dismiss as something,
Yeah.
you minimize it to less than it actually is. And yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, I mean, before you know it, then now you're so invested
Mhm.
that,
Like now we have to see it through. Like now we have to like make it work. So
right.
yeah, so that was definitely my mindset for a while with that. And then like just my experiences in my childhood, I still never really labeled it. Like I never labeled it as like, oh, like this is domestic violence and this is what it means and these are the signs. Like I had nobody ever like teaching me any of that. So I didn't know how to like connect those dots early on in my relationship. It was like also for me, it was normal behavior to like work through these bad things that were happening or to just stay because, you know, this is my partner and that's what you do. You stay even when things like they're good and bad. And,
and that was what was modeled to you as a child. So, you know, until they finally split, right? So that you're,
Sure. So, but that didn't mean I didn't feel like it was wrong. Like I felt like how he was I felt like he was, all of it was wrong. I was like, you don't treat people this way. You don't talk. And listen, I had a voice in the beginning. Like, you're not going to fucking talk to me that like I was, I would definitely like stand up for myself in the beginning until I, you know, he started putting me in my place. And then I was like scared of him. So, the physical abuse, happened pretty early on. I was working at the gym one day and he was there. All the fighters were there and we had like some new members coming in. So I'm speaking to them. I'm doing my job. Right. And showing them the gym and introducing this person to the people in the room. And, I didn't introduce my ex as my boyfriend. He wanted me to say, this is my boyfriend, whatever. And I didn't do that. I was just like, oh, this is this person. This like say hi to hi, whatever. And he got really angry about that. I just remember his whole energy changed. And I didn't know why until he asked to speak to me outside and he told me why he was upset with me. And I was just like, are you kidding me right now? And then it just became sort of like an argument and like push came to shove and like he slapped me across the face that day. And I was just in shock. And I just had I was frozen.
I can imagine.
Thinking like, did this just happen? But you would think my first reaction would be like, get out of this relationship, like, get away from this guy. Like, it's just like if every red flag in the world wasn't like, you know, flying in my face. Like, I don't know, like what else I would have needed to get out like right then. But I just was, again, that's the normal behavior, what I was shown. And like, you know, I had a conversation with my mom and, I don't think she really knew what to say to help guide me through that. And so I stayed. I just, you know, he said all the right things and it's never going to happen again. And sure enough, I forgave him and it happened again.
And would that cycle just keep happening and happening in the same, I mean, that's awful. And you know, I can imagine going through that over something for any reason, period. But for something as simple as not telling a group of people that basically you belong to this person.
Exactly.
It's a really, really, that's a very like territorial and strange need to have, right? So I'm assuming that things would just escalate and escalate over time.
Definitely. And the emotional and mental abuse was like on a daily basis, like the daily like torturing of like the teasing kind of stuff, like the really like putting me down and belittling me, or like because I didn't go to college, that was always something that he, like kind of like, well, what do you know? Like you don't have an education kind of thing. And so like stuff like that was like a constant. Or like he would, for instance, ask me questions about my childhood or like my you know, my younger years, my adolescence growing up. And I would think that he was asking me because he was interested or wanted to learn those parts about me. But really, as time went on, I learned that he just wanted to have information that he could use against me later, or like turn it around and like just make something into like something it wasn't. Like nothing was ever as it seemed, like with him. Like everything always had like an agenda. Or I remember, because at the time we were living in Cincinnati. So I moved in with my brother at one point, and then my brother ended up moving out. And so my ex moved in. So we were living there. And I remember being so afraid that he would see the boxes of like photos from like middle school, which were nothing. Like, I wish I still had those like memories to look back on. It's just like group pictures with my friends, or like us, just being silly, or like just memories.
Right.
And so like,
Yeah.
I remember throwing away so many of like pictures and stuff from my childhood because I was afraid he would like see them and then like destroy the memory by like coming up with some sort of, I know this sounds crazy because you would think like, okay, you're a grown man, why are you picking apart like you're this,
Yeah.
woman's childhood photos? Like, come on. But it was
Yeah.
real. He did stuff like that. Or he would go through like my friends list and things like that on like Facebook or MySpace, and
Yeah.
reach out to people like, how do you know her, and like
Really?
question them. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it
That's
was
so,
crazy.
yeah.
But
I mean, I know it happens, and it's
Mhm.
such a strange thing to me. Like, but I mean, like you said, there's always an agenda, and there's always like, they're almost
Mhm.
like building up ammunition to use at some point
Yeah.
against you, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
all.
crazy.
It's really manipulative and awful. And I mean, and I can imagine that you didn't feel you wouldn't feel safe to share anything at a
No, and
certain
I
point. You'd
didn't. So
probably just shut down.
Mhm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when I caught on to it, what he was doing, I mean, this was like years later, but I like, he would sometimes just out of the blue ask me a question, and it could pertain really to anything, but I just always remembered like, be careful what you say, thinking
Right.
to myself, like, don't give him all the information, just keep it short and simple. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, but back to like that time where like, you know, I was experiencing all these things with him that I didn't really know like how to identify. I got pregnant, and when that happened, I really felt stuck. And by that time, like before I got pregnant, like the isolation, I should definitely touch on that. I was like, it was definitely a gradual process. At the time I was working at a fitness center, and I
Hmm.
worked the graveyard shift. Like I was the opener. So I worked like 4 a.m. to noon
Okay.
so I could train, use the rest of the
Right.
day to train and work at the
Yeah.
gym. So, and then on the weekends I worked as a server. So, and I had a ton of friends. I was like, like I said before, I was like living my life and just like doing my thing. Was having so much fun. And then, but over time, he didn't like so I had like a couple of my teammates who worked out at the gym where I worked. So
Right.
they would come at a certain time to get their lift in. And then I would ride because I didn't have a car. So I would ride when they were done with their lift. It was like when my shift was over,
Okay.
I would jump in the car with them, would go to our MMA school. So that
Right.
was like my routine for the longest time before I met him. And so, but then like time came where he didn't like that. It made him
Right.
uncomfortable. And, you shouldn't be riding alone with like just, two men. I'm like, well, they're not just two men. They're my friends. Like, I don't know what
Yeah.
you mean.
And you've been doing
But
it for
then it just,
years.
right. And
Yeah.
then it got to the point where like he started, didn't like my work schedule, the 4 a.m. to noon. And then, so then I ended up quitting that job. Then I quit, catching a ride to the gym with my friends. And then very, once in a while I'd start missing like more and more classes. And then that fell off. And, yeah. And then just sort of a little bit of separation from my family, which I didn't realize at the time, was happening. But you just find like one day kind of find yourself like, wait a minute, like, where is
Right.
everybody? Like, what's happened? And you don't realize it till it's, already happened, that you've been so isolated, but you're like consumed by this one person, and everything
Hmm.
revolves around them. Like everything I did like revolved around him,
Yeah.
and just the constant like walking on eggshells and catering to his every need. And just, so even though I wasn't like working on a like constant basis, working out like I was, it was like I always felt busy. But I know why. It's because I was like basically his 24-hour assistant.
For
And
sure.
just,
And you're in this state of
yeah.
like hypervigilance
Yeah.
24/7, right?
Hmm.
With these like
Yeah.
the only breaks that you have, I'm sure, is the time when you can actually go and train to like
Hmm.
where your mind isn't on everything else that's going on. That's probably your only
Yeah.
escape, where you actually get to
Hmm.
like, focus on the pads or the pad holder or the sparring partner
Yeah.
ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
Geez,
Yeah.
yeah, it sounds all consuming.
Yeah. So then it just got to a point where I'm like, you know what? It wasn't worth the fight to me
Yeah.
anymore. I'm just like, okay, I'm just not, I'll just, and at the time he was on the come up. So he was starting to gain momentum in his career. And So I was just kind of like, yeah, being that person for him that did everything. And yeah, but then I got pregnant, and then things were not going so great, like from a financial standpoint, because I wasn't working anymore. I wasn't like
Right.
allowed to work. And he wasn't like working between fights. However, like he had the ability to, he just chose not to because he wanted to be over top of me and know like my every move. It was the weirdest
Wow.
thing.
That is.
Yeah. And so we ended up getting evicted from our house in Cincinnati and moving to Tennessee, where his family lives. They
Okay.
live on like a big farm, and so we lived on like the little cabin on the land there. And that was when I really started feeling like super isolated and just
Right.
really alone. And plus that was like his hometown, so he had all of his friends, all of his family. And yeah, I felt really alone, and felt back when I lived in Myrtle Beach with my mom, like, you know, when I moved and I felt like alone, didn't have like, felt like I belonged anywhere.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was like a really lonely thing. And then having to deal with him on a daily basis, and, you know, more physical abuse, like, you know, being pregnant and not knowing, like just never feeling safe.
Yeah.
Just scared on a constant basis of if he's capable of hurting me pregnant, you know, like that really, because it
Right.
wasn't just me, like I'm carrying a child. And it's
Yeah.
that was yeah, a really scary time living on the farm.
And to be going through a pregnancy and also being like in this constant state of like I said, hypervigilance and fear,
Sure.
that's not good for you. That's not good for the baby. That's not good for
No.
anybody.
Yeah. So,
And I can imagine that was so difficult for you to, you know, that's your first time pregnant. Like you don't
yeah.
know exactly what to expect, and now you've got this added pressure of, am
Yeah.
I ever going to be safe or feel safe? Can I ever let
Exactly.
my guard down?
What really like helped keep me like in a good, like any form of like positivity I could find, I would just like, you know, just cherish that as much as I could. And so there were animals on the farm, so that's where I found myself a lot, just spending a lot of time like with the horses. They were like little deer that would like come up to you, like feed the deer. And like, so I always spent like a lot of time around the animals, and that was always like, you know, super special for me. And mind you, like every, you know, being in an abusive relationship, which again, I wasn't labeling it that, I just, to me,
Right.
again, it was normal. So there were definitely times, like, of course, like in any relationship, like we had good times, you know. And then I think that that's also part of the cycle too, where you're like, you get a glimpse of like these great moments together, or even special moments. You're like, okay, all right, he's still there. I just need to like, maybe if I change something about myself or do something different, like he'll always be like this and always
Right.
be nice to me or show me attention, or maybe he
Mm.
won't, you know, hit me, or maybe, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, a lot of times I think sometimes people forget, like, well, this person's so terrible, like how could you stay with them? And I mean, it goes beyond way more than like why stay in an abusive relationship. But I think that like that's part of the cycle, definitely, because again, people don't realize that it's not like abusive 24/7. Yeah, again, you get those glimpses, and then it's like very promising, and you're like, oh wow. And
Yeah, they give you a
I'm
little
not,
piece of hope to latch on to.
yeah,
And then it's,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, and like, uh man, the weirdest thing. So like when we were living on the farm, it was after a night he had um like body slammed me because I was trying to remove myself from the situation because I could feel it escalating.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, trying to leave the house because I wanted to go for a walk, and he wouldn't let me. And was like holding the door closed, like wouldn't let me leave. And that was the only way out. And so you know, trying to pull the door, and then, you know, he, you know, grabbed me up. And he was a 3-time NCAA champion. So like he knows
Right.
like what he's doing, and he's a fighter. So it was like,
Yeah.
it was really scary to go through that. And then like that next day after that happened, there's no apology, no like accountability, or
Wow.
taking like nothing. He proposed to me.
The next
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, I was like, I remember I was like sitting outside, like on this like little swing, like a little wooden swing, and he came out and like gave me this whole speech of how much he loved me and wants to be with me, like all this
Wow.
stuff. And I'm like waiting for the apology. And then he proposes, and I'm like, then I said yes, because I was like, if I don't say yes, what's going to happen, you know? So,
Right.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild. I wonder if that was in his, you know, in his mind, that's like in lieu of an apology, I'm going to do
Yeah.
this, make this grand
Mm-hmm.
gesture, and
Mm-hmm.
I won't have to answer to what I've just done.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Wow. That's awful. I'm
Insane. I
sorry.
know.
I'm
Mhm.
sorry that you have had to go through any of this.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, I really, really commend you on your openness and your honesty
Yeah,
with
sure.
sharing this stuff for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah. So did you get married?
No, 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 no.
No. Okay.
No, we did
Okay. So you said
not.
yes, but it didn't happen.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So after the proposal, I'm not sure how much time had passed, but he was in contact with a friend from New York who wanted to start a business with him. So the idea was they were going to open up sort of like this MMA fitness style training inside of like there's a franchise here, like a gym franchise in Philly. They were going to open up little MMA thingies inside of that, and
Okay.
great idea. But they were both like complete idiots. Like I don't think they knew what they were doing,
Right.
and but that's what brought us to Philadelphia. Not long after that incident, the proposal, I would say, I don't really know how long, like I said, but yeah, found ourselves in Philly.
Okay.
It's like starting this new adventure, and I still felt it was like part of it was exciting because
Yeah.
um yeah, it's Philly and a big city, which was a
Yep.
little intimidating at first, but I was excited for a new chapter. I felt like maybe this is what we needed to like
Right.
get to a good place, and life will be good, and we'll have the baby, and
It's
we'll look
funny how sometimes we
after.
think that, right? Like
Mhm.
geographical cure or something like that, right? New
Right,
people, new
exactly.
environment.
Mhm.
We can reinvent ourselves. We don't have to be this broken
Sure.
couple. We
Yeah.
can, yeah.
Mhm.
And so you had your daughter in when you were in Philly?
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then you
Yeah.
were still with him when you gave birth, right?
Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay.
And honestly, that was like a really good, with the exception of like, I feel like he was just always picking at me for something or just always questioning me about things. But I think I learned how to like compartmentalize it
Yeah.
to where it wasn't like, I think deep down it was still affecting me, but like on the surface, I was just so consumed by like, even though I was experiencing like bad things with him during my pregnancy, I loved being pregnant. Like I
Okay.
loved being pregnant.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I was like, just like so consumed by that. So it was really like, if it, like I said, if it was like impacting me, I probably would not have, I don't really remember it because I was just so happy to like, I was so looking
Right.
forward to like motherhood and like being a mom and
Yeah.
finally like meeting my daughter. And, but yeah, it was, a really, it was, I felt like a good run we had there until like when she was, born. Yeah. And then
Okay.
it was still good for a little bit.
Hmm.
And then we kind of just revert back to the cycle again. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
So it went back to the way it was back on the farm,
Yeah,
and that,
so but
yeah.
it was like a gradual thing, like, it would just
Okay.
kind of it wasn't like this abrupt, like, you just, like, walk in the room one day and, like, slap me across my head or something like that. It was just more of, like, I just noticed his behavior change. He would start, like, questioning me again. I'm like,
Hmm.
"God, like, here we go," and then, please just, like, let this be a bad day," and then it was just, like then the next day it was, like, something else, and then it was
Right.
just, like, always something, and then that kind of just led to um, him putting me down again and then just being like, just having a baby. Of course, my body's not the same anymore. So I was just
Yep.
like picked on a lot for that.
Hmm. Yeah. Totally unfair.
Yeah.
Really, really not
Hmm.
not okay.
Yeah.
Um. So the physical stuff, would that start happening eventually again too?
Eventually, yeah. I think after that incident in, what's it called? In Tennessee, we had another incident actually like, I think I was like 7 or 8 months pregnant, where like he hurt me pretty bad. Like literally when I tell this story and I'm like, he punched a hole through the door, he really punched a hole through the door. And I remember my mom used to make dolls and stuff when we were younger, and we'd go to craft shows and she'd sell them. So sometimes as part of like a Christmas gift or something, she'd send me like a new one of her dolls. For me to have. And I remember a doll I had, had like angel wings on it, and I hung the doll on the door to cover the hole. And that became part of like another story that I've told many times. But anyway, this instance in particular, I again try to remove myself because I could feel it escalating, and the only place I could move to was the bedroom, and tried to hold the door closed. There wasn't a lock on the door, so I was trying to like hold it closed with like my heel and foot on the door, and then like he couldn't open it, so he punched the hole through the door, and I like hit my belly. I had marks on my belly, and then like my forehead was bleeding, and it was just a really bad situation. And but after that, we went a while where he did not like physically abuse me. He would scare me. He would like, smash my phones. Any phone I ever had, he would smash. I could never have anything nice. He would like, punch, like if I was like standing, like if he would like be in my face, and then he would, maybe like hit the wall or something next to my head. But he didn't like for a while, didn't like physically put his hands on me after that, the incidents when I was pregnant. But then eventually like it would start happening again.
Okay.
Like the choking that, the chokes, the headbutts, stuff like that. Yeah.
Can you take me to the moment when you realized that you had to get out of this?
Yeah. That was when my daughter was getting a little older, and she was seeing and hearing a lot of things, and also scared. We still struggled a lot financially because like the gym thing didn't work out, but he still was like refusing to get like a real job between his fights. I remember times offering to work, and then he would make me feel guilty of like, well, we didn't have like somebody else raising our kids, like, how selfish are you, blah, blah, blah. And then like being angry for that. So then it's like, you can't even ask anymore. So anyway, we were going through like some like financial stuff for a while, and just like struggling for no, like when we didn't need to. But I remember like his mental health began to deteriorate.
Okay.
He was somebody who abused prescription medication like Adderall and Vyvanse and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he was able to have it because he had a family member who worked for a doctor in Tennessee, and they would have prescriptions written off of and send it to him. So that was really dangerous because he's not being seen by anyone, and he's just requesting this medication that perhaps he maybe wasn't what he needed.
Right.
And it was causing a lot of, I noticed every time the medicine was sent and he would like change the doses. Like now, no, I need this much now. Now I need more and more, like a stronger dose. And so that always scared me. But any chance I had to like get out of the house with my daughter, I would. So like we would like, I found like this like calendar online. It was like this like mom events calendar, and everything was free. So I would look to that and like look at the day, like, oh, let's go to the park. And like, we could, interact with other kids and like mothers or families. And so we actually had a lot of fun, my daughter and I. So I just always try to keep us busy because I could tell like things were getting darker for him.
For sure.
And a lot of times I was being told by him that he was at the gym. Oh, I'm training today. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And I later found out that he was really just following me and stalking me. He would say he was at the gym, and like the people that would pick him up to take him to the gym later told me that they're like, no, he asked me to drop him off at the library that day. I'm like, what? But it made sense later that I learned that sometimes he would call me and be like, oh, what are you guys doing? And like made it sound like really happy, like there's going to be a happy conversation. And sometimes it was like, I didn't really, at the time it was just over my head. So my daughter and I would be out doing something fun together, or just on a walk, and he'd call me and he'd like, oh, what are you doing? How are you? And then he would be like, look behind you. Or he'd be like, look over by that. Like he would pop off like where we were. And I'm like, what? And he's like, oh, surprise. And I'm like, at the time I was like, oh, that's really nice. And I didn't realize at the time he was actually like stalking us. So anyway,
jeez.
Yeah. So stuff like that, like, it was just weird. I don't know. So yeah, as his mental health was like deteriorating, like just like some pretty messed up things happened where ended up once where my sister, because I was so terrified of him that my sister and her boyfriend at the time like jumped on the next flight to Philly to come to our aid. And so, and at that time, that day in particular, he threatened me. He had said like, if you don't, he's like, you're lucky she's awake, meaning our daughter, that he's like, otherwise I would knock your fucking teeth out. And he said it in like the most calm demeanor. Like he was just, it was different, you know, it was different. And I was just like, okay. So I went and like basically locked her and I in the bedroom. We had just moved into a new apartment by that time. And I stayed in the bedroom. We did not leave that room. I didn't try to leave the house because I just didn't want to, I didn't want to put myself in a situation that it would be hard for me to get out of. So we stayed in the room till my sister got there. I guess maybe he didn't think my sister was serious. And when she showed up, he like freaked out, was crying and begging, like, you know, to have one more night with our daughter. So at that time I was like, okay, fine. Cause at that point I was just like, all right, well, I guess we're moving. Like, I guess, you know, my sister came up with the intention of moving us the hell out of there. And I was with it. And, but I regret giving her to him that night. Like he put on a really good, like, sob story, like, you know, my child, please don't, like, let me have one more night with her. And so I did. And so we woke up to him and her gone the next day. And so there really wasn't like a point of where like I'm leaving him. I just knew like I didn't have a choice but to react to the things he was doing, which ultimately led to, you know, bigger things happening. And then ultimately, led my daughter and I to living in a domestic violence safe haven. We were homeless. And then, you know what? I don't want to say that was the worst. Like, yeah, that was like probably one of the lowest points for me, but I think the lowest was when I didn't have that, where I had no place to go. And I was pushing a stroller with our belongings.
Terrified, right? Like
nowhere to go. Yeah.